Take off your pants right now. Inspect them carefully. I'm sure you can't find anything weird about them. 2 tubes of fabric, one for each leg, sewn together at the crotch. You wear them. All humans do or did at some point. So normal you probably forgot they exist. But for 95% of human history, nobody dressed like this. Not because humans suddenly discovered modesty, and not because they got cold. So why did humans invent pants then? And the answer to that question would never cross your mind. But first, before we go deeper, we need to understand how strange pants actually are. Because pants are not the obvious way to cover a human body. If you give ancient people cloth, hide, or wool, they would probably tailor it to one of the following: a cloak, a robe, a tunic, a skirt. Extremely simple and straightforward. And for an incredibly long time, that was enough. Humans hunted, built shelters, survived winters, raised children, crossed large distances, and fought each other without ever having a reason to invent pants. So if pants were not about cold and not about modesty, then the real question is actually much stranger. What changed in human life that suddenly made the old clothes obsolete? And no, the answer is not as simple as ancient humans suddenly became smarter. That is usually how we imagine old inventions. Like one day, some prehistoric genius looked at a robe and said, wait, what if legs had private rooms? But that is not how clothing usually evolves. People did not invent new garments because they were bored. They invent them because the old garment starts failing. And for most of human life, robes, tunics, and skirts did not fail. If you are walking, sitting, sleeping, gathering food, carrying wood, or standing around a fire pretending you helped, a robe works fine. It covers the body. It keeps heat in. It is easy to make. It does not require complicated tailoring. So the problem was not the human body. The problem was that humans started putting the human body into a situation it was not designed for. So pants were not invented because humans needed clothing. They already had clothing. Pants were invented because humans adopted a new lifestyle, one that required clothing with a specific functionality. So what changed in ancient human life that required one of the weirdest garments ever invented? The answer begins with an animal humans were never supposed to ride: horses. Because for most of ancient human history, wild horses were not transportation. They were food. Fast food, technically. Difficult to catch, very muscular, and not exactly interested in becoming your prehistoric Uber. Humans hunted wild horses long before anyone thought of climbing onto one. So the real mystery is not why did humans ride horses? The real mystery is who looked at this nervous donkey and thought, I can control that? In 2009, archaeologist Outram and his team studied an ancient culture in northern Kazakhstan called the Botai. And what they found was strange. The Botai lived around 3,700 to 3,100 BCE, and their settlements were packed with horse remains. Not a few bones. Not someone had horse for dinner once. At some Botai sites, more than 90% of the animal bones came from horses. That is not casual hunting. That is a whole society orbiting one animal. Then Outram's team found something even more interesting. Traces of horse-milked pottery, possible signs of harnessing, evidence that humans were not just killing horses anymore. They were managing them, using them, getting close enough to drink from them, which is kinda insane, because milking a wild animal is actually crazy if you think about it. But then the story gets complicated. In 2021, geneticist Ludovic Orlando and his team studied ancient horse DNA and discovered that the horses that gave rise to most modern domestic horses probably spread later, around 2,200 BCE from the western Eurasian steppe. So horse domestication was not one clean invention. It was a long, messy experiment. First, horses were food. They became animals humans managed. And once it did, humans gained something no other invention had given them before. A second body, a faster body, a body that could carry them beyond the limits of their own legs. But that leaves one very weird question on the table. What does any of this have to do with your pants? At first, the connection between horses and pants sounds random. Like, okay, humans domesticated horses. Interesting, but why would that require a complete rework of the established clothing design framework? The answer is hidden in one very specific part of pants, the crotch. Because riding a horse is not just sitting and enjoying the scenery. Imagine you are riding a horse while wearing a robe. Your skin rubs against hair, sweat, leather, and pressure for hours and hours. At first it feels fine, then suddenly your ancient crotch starts getting cooked, literally. But pants do something also more specific. They let the legs move separately while the area between them stays protected. That is a very strange design unless your legs are doing something unusual. And riding a horse is exactly that. On horseback, your legs are not just hanging under you. They are spread around the animal. They grip, they adjust, they absorb motion. A robe was never built for that. It can slide up, bunch under the rider, expose the legs, and get trapped between the body and the horse. So riding created a clothing problem that walking never created. The lower body needed protection, but it also needed freedom of movement. That is exactly what pants do. The best evidence for this came in 2014 when archaeologists Ulrike Beck and Mayke Wagner studied 2 pairs of ancient wool trousers from the Yanghai Cemetery in western China. The trousers were dated to around the 13th to 10th centuries BCE, about 3,000 years ago. That made them the oldest surviving pants ever found. And their design pointed directly toward riding. They had straight legs and a wide crotch. Not because ancient people were trying to make a fashion statement, because that shape makes sense for a body sitting on a horse. Then the grave goods made the connection stronger. The men wearing the trousers were buried with objects linked to riding and warfare. A whip, a bridle, a bow, a battle axe, wooden horse gear. So Beck and Wagner argued that the invention of trousers was likely connected to horseback riding, mobility, and mounted warfare. That is the important shift. Pants were not just clothing. They were part of a larger change in human life. Once humans started riding, they needed garments that could handle speed, friction, and separated leg movement. But here's the strange part. The Yanghai trousers were not crude experiments. They were already well designed, which means by the time we find the oldest pants on Earth, the idea may have already been refined for generations. But here is where almost everyone gets the story wrong. After all that, you might think ancient people looked at pants and said, wow, what a genius design. Great job, humanity. Unfortunately, they did not. Some of them looked at pants and said, get this barbarian nonsense out of my sight. And this is important because it proves something strange about invention. Being useful is not enough, and invention also has to become socially acceptable. And for many Greeks and Romans, pants failed that test. They were associated with outsiders, especially horse-riding people, Persians, Scythians, Gauls, the people on the edges of the Greek and Roman world. So trousers were not just a practical solution to a new problem. They carried a message. If you wore them, you were not dressed like a proper civilized person. You were dressed like them. The outsiders, the cold weather people, the horse people, the people Rome liked to defeat, tax, insult, and then secretly copy, because that is exactly what happened. As Rome expanded, its soldiers and cavalry kept running into a small problem. The barbarian pants were practical, especially if you were riding horses for long periods of time. Eventually, Rome started adopting what it once mocked, and by the late Roman period, trousers had become common enough that imperial law tried to push them back. According to the Theodosian Code tradition, by 397 CE, emperors Honorius and Arcadius were connected to a law against wearing trousers and boots inside Rome. That is how powerful clothing symbols can become. A pair of pants could make an empire nervous. So the twist is not just that pants were invented for movement, it is that pants became a cultural battlefield, a fight between comfort and identity, between what works and what a society is willing to admit works. So take a look at your pants again. The most ordinary thing you are wearing might be carrying one of the strangest stories in human history. They began as a solution to a newfound daily problem, a way for the human body to handle a new emerging way of life. For some, they were a practical necessity and military equipment. And for others, they became a symbol of outsiders. Then, somehow they became so normal that billions of people wear them without thinking. That is what humans do. We turn problems into tools. Then, we turn tools into identity. Then we forget the original problem ever existed. Your pants are a perfect example. They are not just fabric. They are the fossils of a lifestyle shift. They were a sign that human life had changed. People were no longer only walking across the world, they were riding through it, living with animals in ways their ancestors could barely imagine. And to make that new life possible, the body needed a new clothing design. And the funny part is, the thing that once looked barbaric eventually became almost invisible. Today, pants do not make you look like a steppe rider, or a Roman rebel, or a threat to civilization. They are just clothing preferences, which is how every successful invention disappears. Not by being forgotten, but by becoming too normal to notice. Pants were once a radical answer to a new way of moving through the world. So maybe the question is not why ancient humans started wearing pants. Maybe the question is, what are you wearing right now that future humans will think is not normal?